Now I'd like to welcome Iain Begg, professor at the European Institute, London School of Economics and Political Science, to discuss some of the implications that we can already see. Hello, sir, and thanks for joining us on TVP World today.
Good afternoon.
Now, when we look at these latest round of European Union parliamentary elections, in your mind, who's the biggest winner, who's the biggest loser, and who's the biggest surprise?
Let me start with the biggest surprise, and that is that despite all the expectations that the far right would gain enormously, it really has not. So the second element of the biggest surprise is that the generally pro-European parties in the centre of the European Parliament, that's the EPP group, centre-right, the Social and Democrat group, centre-left, the Greens and the Liberals, who go under the heading of Renew, have maintained 63% of the seats. And the reason that's important is that they constitute, therefore, a working majority for getting most of the European Union's business that relies on the Parliament, making it happen. Also, if you look through in more detail, you see that the far right, who are expected to be major beneficiaries of these elections, have been very fragmented. And there are reasons for that fragmentation. Take one example, Italy. Giorgia Meloni's party, the Fratelli d'Italia, they have won, and Matteo Salvini's party, which is now in his own name, has lost. So the centre-right in Italy is holding. The far right has gone up and down for different bits, and you see similar things in other parts of the European Union. Even the centre-right European People's Party gained seats during the election rather than lose them, partly I think because of what happened in Poland, where the Platforma party managed to do better and PiS did worse than it did previously. So very much a nuanced picture, and that has ramifications for many of the things the European Parliament contributes to the EU body politic.
Now, the new Parliament, how will its shape influence the direction, in your opinion, over the next 5 years?
Well, one straightforward answer is that the things that the middle ground, the pro-European parties want, will remain, broadly speaking, on the agenda. We know that one of the issues during the election was the concerns about the Green Deal being too intrusive. I think the Green Deal will therefore survive, and that it's also very probable that Ursula von der Leyen will be appointed for a second term because she has enough support across the centre ground to enable her to be reappointed. She was a great advocate of the Green Deal. She will want to trim it a bit because she recognises the things that the damage it does in some areas, like to the agricultural community, but also major industrial companies. So that's likely to stay. Obviously, a big question is immigration, and some of the pressure coming from the more populist right-wing parties has been to do something more effective against the scale of migration. That is likely to be on the agenda, but it won't be as hardline as it might have been. And another big thing coming up in the next 2 or 3 years will be the future of the EU's finances, and in particular the multi-annual financial framework, which is always a very contentious topic.
Now, the Spitzenkandidat process, is it dead or alive, or does it really matter because we're coming on with the EPP coming up on top, and they basically have the prerogative as far as choosing the Commission president?
Well, just to explain briefly to your viewers, the Spitzenkandidat idea came from the European Parliament, which wanted to nominate individuals from the main political groups. The candidate coming from the European People's Party, the centre-right party, is in fact Ursula von der Leyen. So if she's reappointed, as seems highly probable now, you could say in one respect the Spitzenkandidat process worked. And yet if you look back 5 years, she came out of nowhere to become the president of the European Commission, overruling the then Spitzenkandidat. The other Spitzenkandidaten were nowhere in the discussions. I think you would struggle, even you as a political commentator would struggle to identify the various Spitzenkandidaten from the other parties. In fact, the Liberals had 3 different ones. So the process is working to the extent that the next Commission President is likely to be the Spitzenkandidat, but it's not working to the extent that they're really visible as contenders for the top job of the European Commission President.
Right, before these elections, Miss Meloni in Italy was considered to be potentially a kingmaker, but now based on these results that we're seeing, it looks like that will not be happening. And Mario Draghi, well, he's probably not going to make it. Yeah, in your opinion, Ursula von der Leyen will be back, yes?
Yes, but don't forget that there are three other top jobs to be apportioned. There is the President of the European Parliament. There is the President of the European Council, the job that Donald Tusk used to have. And you have the High Representative, who is de facto the European Union's foreign policy representative. In selecting for these jobs, there's going to be a very difficult balancing act because it has to follow a combination of centre-right, centre-left, north-south, male-female, maybe not just north-south, but north-south-east in the European construction. And therefore, you will find it very difficult to find candidates that fit enough of these things. It may be the case that if I'm correct in saying that Ursula von der Leyen will continue as the President of the European Commission, then the President of the European Council would have to be from a different European political family, or at least the High Representative would. So there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position to try to reconcile these different criteria that they have to meet at the same time as achieving balance.
And just for clarification, that I believe that process begins just after the G7 summit, after June 17th or so. How long do you think this whole process will take as well to?
Well, the first thing is likely to be the European Council President, but that requires the European Commission President. That requires the European Parliament to convene, and I think that will not be immediate because it will take some time for that to happen. We've also seen, maybe as a result of these elections, a relative shift in the power of different member states. I see you have on screen pictures of Emmanuel Macron. He clearly is a bit of a loser in these elections in that his rival, Marine Le Pen, has done better than him in the European Parliament elections. The same thing for Olaf Scholz in Germany. Whereas I would say that Donald Tusk has been strengthened and Meloni has been strengthened by the way they've done. So just among the bigger countries, you will see shifts in their capability to influence all these jobs. It's going to happen over the summer. I wouldn't expect immediate results.
Okay, and then this shakeup that we're seeing in in France currently, with these snap elections being called by President Macron, do you think that was a good move for him to do? He must have been counting on surprising Marine Le Pen's party and maybe catching them a little bit off guard. But looking at the polls right now, it seems to have pretty quickly not panned out for President Macron.
I think he surprised not just Marine Le Pen, he surprised everybody with this gesture. And I think you can point to two or three things behind it. One is that because he does not at present have a working majority in the Assemblée Nationale, the French legislative body, he is frustrated in not being able to push through his own agenda. Second, he may be in some ways setting a trap for Marine Le Pen of the far right, because if she wins the bigger share of the seats in the French Parliament, she may not have enough to be able to govern as Prime Minister or her nominee as Prime Minister. She very much wants to be the next French president. Macron very much wants to stop her. And let's not forget the particular French voting system, which is in 2 rounds. The first round, everybody's submitted, and the voters choose who they put in order of preference. Marine Le Pen will probably win that round. But in the second round, it's the 2 remaining candidates who are up for election. And of those 2 remaining candidates, let's suppose Marine Le Pen's party is one of them, the rest can gang up against her, as they have done in electing Macron twice and previously electing Jacques Chirac, but also previously in many of the French legislative elections. So it's a cunning move in some respects by Macron, but high risk. If you look at his counterpart across the channel, I think Rishi Sunak may well be regretting the fact that he brought forward elections.
Right, so quite a process. Now, the power of the Parliament, will it grow or will it stay the same? Do you agree that that it's been slightly diminished in the years after great European crises such as the financial, sovereign debt, migration, and finally the war in Ukraine?
But the European Parliament is a curious parliament because it has clear powers in some areas, notably legislation, because it's the co-legislator with the Council of Ministers, who are the representatives of the member states. So it's a bit like having the House of Representatives in the US, which is constituency by constituency, and the Senate, which is representatives of individual states. However, there are areas that the Parliament is not really able to influence. And also, unlike legislators elsewhere, the European Parliament does not formally have the right of initiative on new legislation. That has to come from the European Commission. So it's a weak Parliament in some of these respects. Also, on the expenditure side, the European Parliament has a say in deciding on European level public expenditure, but not on the revenue side. Now, you mentioned the crises. One outcome of the crisis was the adoption of what's called Next Generation EU, the big rescue package launched in 2020, currently underway, with big amounts of money being based on borrowing by the European level. The Parliament was sidelined in that because it had to be done quickly, and there wasn't a legislative process available to enable the Parliament to have a big say in it. Now, whether the European Union reverts to having everything inside the normal budget or continues with different forms of funding based on borrowing is one of these open questions. The new Ukraine facility is a further round of borrowing, but many member states have said, no, Next Generation EU is a one-off, we're not going to do it again. All I can say in that is watch this space.
Now, concerning Ukraine, that's also a big question on many people's minds. Will the unity over Ukraine continue in its current form? Or is there potential political trouble as far as support for Ukraine is concerned?
Well, I think you already know the answer to that. There's some of Poland's neighbours who are not very keen on the unity, particularly Hungary and Slovakia. And there are different perspectives. If the far right comes to power in other European countries, not immediately, because the European parliaments don't bring it into power, but in subsequent legislative elections, you could see more sympathy towards a certain person called Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, so far the European Union, with the exception really of Hungary, has held together pretty well in opposing Putin and supporting Ukraine. But there's going to be exhaustion in that. And the exhaustion is something that is going to have an influence on the decisions of future voters and the parties that therefore respond to them. So I think Ukraine has things to worry about, even though for the time being it looks okay.
For the time being, looks okay, but of course there's also the daunting task of paying for our own security here in Europe, and that's something we'll definitely be keeping an eye on. Well, sir, Iain, excuse me, Begg, sorry about that.
Iain Begg,
Professor
yes.
at the European Institute, London School of Economics and Political Science. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your valuable insight on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to me.